to
say.
We have anyone that's joining online? Tom's not joining, right?
no, it's all day today.
You ready? Everyone? All right, welcome everyone. Good to see you Thursday, August 15th. We'll start by just kind of going through what we're going to be discussing today. We're going to start with a roll call. I know Tom's not going to be here, but you know, for the sake of administrative purposes, we'll go ahead and do a roll call. So can we start there?
Okay. I have Mr. Tom Hermanson, I can say, you know, he's actually. Okay, Miss Jackie Barker. Mr. Fred Poppy. Mr. Hunter Gaylord,
Present.
Mr. Jeff Robinson,
Present.
Miss Elizabeth Snyder,
Here.
Miss Pam Rottenberg.
Rothenberg. I'm
Rothenberg.
here.
Miss Candace Rogers,
Present.
and Mr. Doug Lebo.
All right, so we're gonna move to the agenda review. So the board members request to disclose any conflicts of interest with any of the agenda items or any business relationships between the board. I'll open that up. Does anyone have anything before we? Once, twice, okay. So moving on, we do have to do the approval of the capital facilities committee minutes of July 11th. So I propose a motion. Do I get a second motion on the approval of that?
I'll second.
Second, all those that approve, say aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it, and we can move on to part 2 of the agenda. So these are the grant application scoring, discussions, and recommendations. So I know that we have recordings here of everyone's scores. But what we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and I'm gonna allow Jeff to maybe do an introduction. I'd like to make a couple of comments based on this after he does the introduction, so I can just give you my thoughts and feelings with regards to the process. And then we can go into each grant application, and then we'll open up for discussions for everyone as well. All right, does that sound like a plan for everyone? Okay, any comments? People want to add anything to it? All right, excellent. So Jeff, the floor is yours.
Okay, everybody, make sure you're on page 10, the scoring summary. Okay, so page 10, the scoring summary, Cape Canaveral Lighthouse Cottages. Okay, the scores are all there by committee member. The score total was 643. The average score was 71.4. The trim mean, which is the high and low scores discarded, we'll see right above the 32 and the 88 comes to 74.7. So just keep in mind 75 is per the guidelines is the minimum score for award. But the committee, we have done things in the past. You do have some flexibility. Okay, the dollar ask is 775,000. The dollar ask factored at the 74.7, the trim mean is 579K. And on the bottom, if you go across the 1.7 million, just to make it clear, is all the board authorized us to award this cycle. So we took the 1.7 million, divided it into the total of the 3 trim means, the factored at trim means, and it came out to like around 23%. So we just took the trim mean and dropped that down at 23% proportionately as a guideline. You have 1.7 million to allocate. We're not suggesting you do this, but we're just giving you just a guideline of thought.
Yeah, I think, Mr. Chair and Jeff, I think it was just, trying to show if you were to say, hey, we want to award something to all of these projects, here's a way that you could do that and stay within the 1.7. I'll just point out, on page 8, your packet, this is just a little projection that we do. This showed available balance of next year potentially being 1.85 million. That would be with probably some interest included in there. But Jeff mentioned what the board had approved when the original guidelines were approved a number of months back was 1.7. So, you know, we just, the next couple of years, as I think I had mentioned at the last meeting, it's just going to be a couple of tight years for us, as a lot of projects are beginning to begin getting allocations of dollars. The other comment I was just going to make about the about page 10, what Jeff was talking about was, you know, I know you could approach it a couple of different ways. One could be, you know, you look at the project that did get basically 75, so did hit the minimum score. You could award the entire amount to them or some variation of that. So that's up to the committee. That's something you can deliberate on. And then the same thing with the other two projects, you know, you could potentially say, you know, we don't want to award anything because they didn't hit their minimum. Or if we're going to award something, you know, there's some different ways that you can slice and dice it. So you know, really it's up to the committee to make the recommendation in the TDC, and then ultimately the TDC will have to make a recommendation to the board for their final decision.
The one clarifying question I have is 1.7 that could be spent. Is that a use it or lose it, or does it carry over?
It can carry over if we don't use it.
All right, I was under that impression. I just want to clarify. Thank you.
Sure. So I'll just quickly wrap up. The pool score total was 531. Average score was 59. The trim mean with the 76 and the 34 discarded was 60.1. And then their dollar ask was 3 million. And of course, the factor and then the allocation, just for discussion purposes, are below there. Titusville Playhouse, total score 566, average score 62.9, trim mean 65, that's the 26 and 85 discarded. And then their dollar ask was 7.5 million, factored at trim mean, and then the funds available at the 23% for discussion purposes. So that's all I have back there.
All right, so I guess we'll kind of go. I want to make a couple of comments here, just from a little bit of finance and stuff. I had a couple of issues with the scoring sheets in general, which the committee we can bring up at a later date. If you are looking at our individual scores, which is public, you can see it the way we scored. I will say the way I scored was based on assuming there was a budget there. Okay. As we look at these projects, and it's going to be open for discussion, the fact that we're only dealing with 1.7 million is something that we should take into account. Okay, because if that's all we have to spend with the way that the economy's at, our job as the committee is to promote tourism. And where the budget we come from, Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong, is that's the 4% tax from, or the 5% bed tax. I apologize.
Yep.
So the more that we have heads in beds, the more people here, the more our budget goes, right? So when we look at through those lenses, Tom said, not here today, that's how we're looking at it. So we don't have to spend the 1.7, but take it into consideration. We do have a responsibility to the county for these projects to drive more tourism. So that's my 2 cents on the matter. So with that being said, does anyone else have any questions or comments before we go to the first review? No?
I would agree with you on as far as scoring and the metrics, because I did bring this up last year as well. If you are truly going by what is on paper, it's very hard for anybody to reach.
Yeah, and I don't want,
That
I
75.
think the point is off that is, if this was if I'm Mr. Wonderful on Shark Tank, you didn't make the score, you don't get the money. Have a nice day, right?
Right.
But, I still have a heart, I still like
Mhm.
capitalism, right? And I believe in entrepreneurship. That being said, we still need to go through, and this is where a committee, I'm not the chairman of an investment company, right? Well, I am, but that's not this, but so it would be, it's a different, we just have to be open-minded with that. So maybe we can adjust what that scoring sheet looks like in the future and how we go about doing this, but that we can discuss at a later time. So that being said, with those comments, unless anyone else has anything, yes.
I have one other, and I know it was included on some of the sheets, but just about eligibility,
Yes,
and that 2 of the 3 projects had notes about, they didn't meet the legal description of eligibility, so how we address that.
okay, so eligibility, we'll put that in the notes for conversation. The other thing too is on the feasibility studies. I did have a couple of personal issues in reading the feasibility studies, just due to the fact that I don't want my, conflict of interest to come in, but I read these things professionally, and if it doesn't increase the level of actual data-driven facts on what's going to bring people here, then I can't use that as a viable metric, right? So there were some issues there, and we can go through that on a case-by-case basis, but I would agree, so.
Yeah, and I would just also comment on the eligibility factor. We've learned over the last couple of years that the county attorney's office has, some different ways that they believe there may be a path for the board to give approval if there's a project that, the TDC really wants to bring forward and make a recommendation. And the board is open to that. There are some different ways that the CAO sees fit to get there. So I didn't want to, we don't want to stop the process here at this level. We really will, let's let it go up through the TDC, let the TDC decide what they want to do. And if they want to bring it forward, then we'll work with the CAO on their recommendations. So I don't think this committee needs to get bogged down too much into the minutia of the legal opinions, if you will.
All right, so does anyone else have anything that they'd like to share? No? Okay, we'll move right into the Cape Canaveral Lighthouse. So that can be found, that's on the first project page. If you want to look at through some of those, we want to open the floor up to discussions on that. I know they were asking for a total of 775,000. And obviously, if we're referring just simply to page 10 on our scoring sheets, if you were to round up, theoretically, they would qualify for some sort of funding using the factored tree mean number, and then what the funds will, knowing what our available funds are, they would be qualified to receive funds. I'm not going to say that exact amount. I am going to say they would technically qualify. I don't know if we're actually, do we use a rounding process here, or do you have to?
You can,
You can?
Yeah.
I mean, I would take it to a vote just so that I'm not the bad guy, right? But if I could do that, I'd like to motion for a vote to see whether or not you would accept, the committee would accept a roundup of the number to 75 to fulfill the, the number to receive funding. Do I have a second on that?
Second.
All those in favor? Say aye. Aye. You want a formal vote on the aye to know how many, or I think we're all good, right? Yeah, okay, so they would qualify, so they're at 75. So their ask amount was 770, obviously, I'll leave it up to the floor. If anyone would like to discuss, we can go in order, or we can just simply, who would like to start on any comments or questions?
If I heard them correctly when they made their presentation, the project is go, no go based on the amount in which they get equal to 775,000. And so I think if the TDs, and I don't know if anybody's here from the light.
They are.
But my understanding was that we were almost a single source funding other than $200,000. And so if we don't award the full amount, I'm not sure that the project is a go.
Well, actually, correct me if I'm wrong, there was a question. Now, are they not allowed to come up for public comment? Are they? Or no?
Can she comment here?
Can they comment?
If you would like, Mr. Chair, you can call up.
Just so that our,
Questioning,
so
yep.
just for the facts, I'd like to, if everyone would agree, just to do some clarifying, if you wouldn't mind answering some questions for us.
So in this context of what we said and what we tapped it with is the fact that the 775 would allow us to build both cottages now. If we get less funding than that, we can build one of the cottages. So it's not a full 775 or not.
But in the building, but in the building process, when you were awarded the last time, it was a phased build out approach, correct?
Correct.
And so you didn't have to spend all the money up front, so the use of proceeds could be on a drawdown schedule based on your milestone completions. So what I mean by that is if you have two buildings, right, you start the first one, right, when that gets completed, you meet that milestone, you could qualify for getting funding for the next one.
I
Correct.
think so. I think.
Okay, what was the amount on the first to get started?
The TDC awarded 500,000 on first phase. And we had 250,000 from the state on that phase also, and then we contributed over 100,000.
Okay,
So with that, we expended all of those money to build the two, the first cottage and the rest.
could you, in today's market, do the same thing? For the next project size?
Well, we built both of those buildings at the same time.
Right, so, but the next one, you're building two more, correct?
Right.
Okay,
Built just one and then.
can you build just one to the same model you did last time? And you would be okay with that?
Yes.
Does that make sense economically here for everyone? And what would that amount be?
We haven't done that analysis yet because our, the builder who gave us the information put them all together, the architect. So we haven't been able to keep that apart, and it's not a simple take the 775 and chop it like 2/3 and 1/3. Because there are things that would have to be done again, separated the time frame, because there's the economies of scale. So it would cost a little more, the total of both buildings would cost more if we did them two different times than if we did them all together. But I'm sure we can build one or the other. The smaller building will cost less, obviously, than the larger building. It depends on what it is that you would want to award. We would figure that out.
If you had just hypothetically, if you had the 579 plus your cash on hand, you would have enough to do the whole project plus the 200K.
I theoretically, that would leave us 125,000 short, but.
Oh, it's $1 million, the whole, what's the whole project?
Project.
978,
Yeah.
And so, okay.
978, 708.
Are you going to the state again?
We would have to wait until next year. We went to the state and the legislature approved it. And then the governor vetoed it. When he vetoed all the other cultural grants this year. So we can't go this year.
I'll leave it up to the board, but go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to just say, so if they were, out of that percentage at the 135.6, and as you said, that total that was given didn't break it down for the two buildings. In essence, how would the 135K be allocated? You know, based on what you said, the buildings is 865,000. So that 135,000 basically covers just a little bit more than the site work that you cited at 95,000. So in essence, how would those 135,000, if that was what we vote to allocate, how would that be divvied up based on, even though you've given it for the two buildings, that 135 doesn't seem like it would cover anything but it's the site work and the architectural, basically, on the total project cost. So how does it work insofar as how they use the funds?
You know, look, in my very humble opinion, you know, it's a choice between, you know, what we can and cannot do and whether or not you feel, based on your study, that having an additional 2 cottages is going to increase the tourism for the area, right? That's what we as the committee have to, you know, understand, right? As much as I would love to write you a check right now for it, for everyone, right? I can't do that. So if that 135 that you get plus the 203 leaves you at, you know, 3 something, you're still running at a deficit, even if you were to just do one. My question would be, can you be more innovative from maybe various contractors that could potentially lower their price because you're a nonprofit organization and because you're on the base property and some of these other things? Is there any type of negotiation you would be able to do? I would have no problem being able to award $135,000 according to this number, right, for you to begin a process, but we would, it would create a little bit of a building issue on your process for evaluation, right? So I'm not opposed to, or I don't think the committee's opposed to giving you some sort of allocation, but it's not going to be everything you want, right? To be able to do what it is that you would want to do. I can't solve that for you. That's something you would have to talk internally. But that would be my comment on it, but I leave it open for the floor for discussion. Go ahead, Jackie.
I would just say that when we look at the funds available, and you said you did an even 23% across the board, when you look at the scoring, obviously this score is higher than the other projects. So for me personally, I would have a hard time going with those funds available across the board, knowing that this scored higher because it did meet a lot of the other metrics on the scoring criteria.
So you're saying in essence, out of the 1.7 million, that because they met that benchmark, that in essence, their request of the 775 could be totally funded out of the 1.7 million that's available.
Well, it could be, or I
Right.
just don't think we're comparing apples to apples when we're taking 23% for each
yes.
project when the scoring metrics are not the same.
Yeah, it was just a haircut across the board as opposed to
Right.
some sort of weighted,
It's a
whatever.
place for us to start.
Right,
Yes.
and that's what it
Yeah.
was, that was all it was meant to be, because it was really up to the committee how they wanna allocate funds, so.
I mean, theoretically, what could you do with $500,000? And you're matching 203. You haven't gone to the state. I didn't really see anything about like donations or anything from the Space Force or anything else. Are they contributing anything?
They're not allowed to by law.
They're not. Well, if someone needs to change the law, they're on their property. I mean,
They feel they're giving the land.
oh, well,
I mean, that's, I'm making an assumption.
any more questions?
And I think I asked this last time, but, do you have a backup plan? Am I allowed? to
Yeah,
ask? Do you have a backup plan to, for additional funding, whether it's fundraising? The money that you already have is from, ticket sales, correct? Or gift shop,
We don't have tickets.
or, well,
We do fundraising for the gift shop, and we have major fundraisers. We just had one a couple weeks ago. So, and we sell memberships, we sell
membership.
various other things like that, and we are continuing to do that. We only put that $200,000 in there that we have because it's in the bank now, and you could see it in the bank now. We didn't think could give you a promissory note that says, we plan to raise another $50,000 this year, which we do, and we are. So we do have extra money coming in, we just can't point to it in the bank and say, there it is, that's proof.
Right, but my concern is that if we give you a portion of what you're asking for, how are you going to raise the difference? And is, are we sort of, for lack of better word, wasting that portion that we're giving to you because you won't be in a position to make up the difference?
Well, truthfully, it would depend on what that portion was. So for example, if it went for the 579 or somewhere thereabouts, we could do, with our money in there, we could do the larger building. We could build that larger building. And we would continue to do the fundraising, and maybe we could tack on the other building. We still haven't done the competitive bid. It's only an estimate based on one of our contractors who built the original condos and upgraded for the inflation and everywhere the economy is right now. So there's very possible that we could decrease, and to your point, we could decrease the amount we would need to spend just based on the competitive.
Anybody else have comments? I mean, I could go on forever, but we don't have the time. So,
I guess I'll just add what my thoughts were when I evaluated this one. What's different here is that, the committee and board and county previously had approved and funded the first phase of the project. So this to me was kind of a continuation of it. So I thought that was, had some interest or value to it. I thought I remembered in the presentation that did have some price differences for the two different buildings, but maybe that wasn't really, some finalized total numbers. Yeah, I'll just say that, it is a project that I thought the previous committee and board and county thought was worthy of tourist dollars. That's the part we haven't really poked on here too much, right? Is this really gonna drive that extra piece of interest? If I remember from the presentation, they're starting to build the, kind of the group tour business, right, to get that going there. So I think completing and building out the destination would help to grow that group tour business. That's gonna be, goes along with the whole port, aquarium, and all the other things that are going on in this location. So I found that to have value that would be worth funding. Those are just some of my
Anybody else? Peter? No, just a little bit.
I'll add my 2 cents. I agree with your assessment. I think my only concern was what you started with, Hunter, and that's heads and beds. I am a lighthouse fan. I've gone to every lighthouse in the state of Florida, and have climbed to the top every time I get a chance. My only concern was based on the studies that they did in their application. I didn't see, dollar for dollar, that great of an increase in heads and beds. And so if that was my criteria for evaluating, that's where I met concern. The presentation was excellent. The project historically is super exciting. But from a tourism dollar standpoint, that was where my concern was.
Yeah, I would second that. My only thing is we have to look at the long-term, deal that we have. Because this is an obligation, and that's for any project, anything that we're gonna discuss today. Because we have obligations starting 26 all the way out to 3033, and to be blatantly honest, we don't know where we're going in November, right? So, and as far as anything's concerned, to your point, this is a new committee and a new year, and we have to play the cards we're dealt. So, I would be willing to award something. I just don't know what that number is. I think that's a committee decision, right? But even then, I couldn't tell you what the number was. And I'm never one to give you personal reference.
I do have a question, as far as clarification on the dollar. So if we awarded less than, or say we're looking at I better put my glasses on, 135, and they can't do the fundraising, the project can be canceled. That doesn't necessarily mean we're writing them a check and they're moving, or are we?
No, these are reimbursement grants.
Okay,
So, yeah,
that's-
the project has to.
Right, so if they can't
A viable
raise the
project.
additional funds to build the
Nothing
second
happens,
building
then
or the
we
second,
don't,
and third,
the money just sits in the
Right.
budget until.
okay, I just want to clarify that.
They have 3 years to break ground and 6 years to finish the project.
What's the payment over time on that?
It's reimbursement, so it's based on whatever they, if they got awarded $200,000, then they could submit 50,000 a year for 4 years, or. They could submit nothing for the first 5 years, and then in year 6, submit 200,000, so however the project rolls. I just have to break ground.
That was good information. Great.
Anybody else have comments? Yeah, please.
I
please.
agree with Doug and Jeff. They have a history.
Yeah.
And it's been proven. And I think they're very conservative in their assessment. Heads and beds, not sure, but I think it adds to the impact. And I think it becomes more interesting that you have it's in an area that I think it will be enhancing to that total of people wanting to come. And I also agree that I don't think just because, if you don't qualify, you don't qualify. So I don't think giving somebody 23% because they didn't qualify, I think you give them nothing. I think we have to look at them each individually before we decide how much we want to give. If we decide somebody did not qualify, so we don't want to put anything
why would you give them anything? Then that may be something that you can give to somebody that is stronger, and that's just my opinion.
So what number would you start out with? If you had to award the lighthouse, given everything we've talked about, everything you've heard, what number would you potentially
Oh,
allocate?
so I'm gonna be the first one.
Set myself up for that.
I believe she mentioned, that she could start, could knock it down to around 500. And if that she was able to perform and do the two, I'd be okay with that. Because if somebody's so weak, they don't really qualify, maybe they can come back and qualify. I don't think that she should be punished for having a history of being very conservative and paying on time and so on and so forth. So I don't think she should be penalized. And she mentioned the 500, so I'll go with the 500.
So we're essentially doing an exact applicant match amount is essentially what you're saying.
I think she's strong enough to do it. Yeah, I guess so.
Well, it wouldn't be a
Actually-
match amount because the request is
775,
775.
right. I said 5.
Well, no, I'm saying if we were to put to meet that 5, she's saying 200, we put oh, you're saying 500 total. Oh, I see. Okay, so that would be upper for us. Yeah, okay.
You get a little sick.
Yeah. Yes,
And to Candace's point, if we're just going straight across the board, that the threshold is a total of 75 points. And we've agreed to round up, so the 74.7 brings the lighthouse to that 75% threshold. Then, in essence, they have met the mark, and their dollar ask of the 775, in theory, could be funded out of the 1.7 million that we have. And again, not to, as both Doug and Jeff said, we want to give everybody the money, but if it's heads and beds and the way that the information was presented and the way that they were saying, did they show accordingly that they've specifically cited the methodologies or what have you, if the other ones were, 15 points and 10 points below that 75% threshold, then they really haven't met the grade. And so getting a proportionate share is taking away from an entity that has met it.
right. So essentially
And the heads and beds.
what I'm hearing is because of the track record, it's okay because assuming we have 1.7, and in reality, we shouldn't even listen if we don't have the money, but in reality, 1.7, okay? The other two, essentially, we could just put aside, going by what we're talking about, right?
Right.
So then there's award amount based on what we would, this instead of 570 or whatever it would be, the number that would be voted on by the committee, I guess is what you're saying.
Well, I would like to talk about all projects before we kind of formulate how we want to proceed. But
Right.
I think that we've talked about this, maybe we might want to move on to the
Yeah.
others because it may give us an,
Yeah, so, and I think we'll do that for the sake of, keeping it fluid. So if it's 1.7, going off of that theory, we're essentially saying 5, right? So, minus it, we're still at 1.3, assuming that model. Okay, I want to keep that
Mhm.
just in everyone's head from a financial perspective as we continue down. So that, does anyone have any questions on this before we move on to the next? Well, technically, I don't want to, since we have an action item for each of these, are we gonna vote on each one, or do we want to hear them all
Can we
first?
table it?
It's the committee's pleasure. They can table this and discuss each one and then come back and revisit.
Yes,
Okay,
I'd
we'll
like
do
to
that.
Yeah.
Table it until
Okay,
the end
do I
after.
have a
you-
second? Okay, second, okay, all those in favor?
I,
Okay, so we'll table all of the action items till the end after we've heard from all of it, so we know what our budget is, what we can allocate,
We had
what
a
we're willing to
discussion.
allocate. Okay, look at us being financially, conservative. Okay, the next is the Swim Melbourne Foundation. That was the Palm Shore Pool. Their request was 3 million. And that's on page is that?
38.
38. Okay, and of course you can see the scoring on that. Now, this one I will say, just from the scoring, This was a little tough for me because I could not get my head around some of the metrics numbers. But I'm gonna open it up for the floor. Who wants to tackle this one first?
I feel like out of all of the applicants, this one has the most potential to grow room nights in the county. It's new business. There's opportunity for growth in the time of year that we need it. And you know, to me, that's what this is all about.
Jackie, go ahead, your hand was up first.
Go, Jackie.
I definitely saw it differently in the presentation and then what was sent over to us because the majority were local, it was local traffic. And the room to grow, I mean, I believe in it, but I believe it would have to be much larger in order to really put heads in beds. Because when they were giving us numbers as far as what was local and what was tourism, I mean, I don't know the percentage, but I know it was majority local that were going to be utilizing the pool. They were going to be bringing in a few colleges, but even then, when we asked those questions, it was maybe 5 colleges that would come and use the facility in December. The numbers weren't big. And I think that that's reflective of what we're seeing in the scores and why the scores were so low. There were a few high ones, but I definitely felt from a tourism perspective, it was really speaking to locals. I think it's a great project. I was a swimmer, I love it, but
Oh, you want, yeah, okay. I agree with Jackie. I think it has, I really would love to have this kind of project. However, my personal opinion is that it didn't meet the expectation. It wasn't as good as maybe a college. I mean, I've seen some of these and it was like they were trying to fit this too. Of course, there might be almost too conservative and not visionary enough.
think bigger, yes.
Think bigger. And I hope that he's here, I believe, he will hear this and try to generate the money to do that, which I think your idea is fantastic. But I think you also need to bring in somebody maybe that is in the could be a spokesman for you as you're trying to raise this money, that could sit on your board, you know, like an Olympic swimmer that we've had out of Florida, and be that spokesman to get that money flowing in. But I would think bigger. I think trying to make it fit what you can afford at this moment is not the way to go on this project. I think you need to go big so you can bring in and compete with the college. I mean, some of these colleges have fantastic University of Florida. I mean, look what they did. So anyway, I really wanted this to be bigger and
Like
I
the national training centers.
exactly. I
envisioned
mean,
it.
it would be, you know, so that's what I would go for. I think it was just a matter of trying to fit it with the money. And I think whatever additional lands you have, you need to know what you're going to use that for. Not, well, it could be this, could be the volleyball, it could be this. I think you need to commit to what it can be and go for it. Because I like the project. I gave it a, what, 76, but, was that me? 76, yeah. 71? Oh, thank you. So that was why I did that. I could be wrong, but I just don't think you'll get the heads and beds. And it looked like, I didn't like this. Bleachers, oh, we bring our own chairs. I think we need to step it up. That's it. And be inside.
Go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, so, my observation of these athletic sports businesses, that there are a lot of organizations that travel. I mean, you see the success that's gone on in Viera since they converted that. And so I think it could drive some of that travel. I agree. I think a bigger, like it's like a half swim Olympic pool. I'm like,
Yeah.
why there's no whole thing, right? But I think the thing that kind of gave me the most pause was more organizationally, and being able to execute on it. It's a new operation organization. I'm not really sure what the business model, financial I still have concerns about the whole arrangement with the property and the ownership and some of those things, so. While I thought there may have been a path forward tourist wise, I was kind of worried a little bit about the execution and organization. Cause it's just brand new, it's being stood up and just giving a bunch of money that, you know, I'm not sure about.
Anybody else?
Mike's here if you need any clarification on any.
Okay, Mike is here. Okay, Mike's here if we need any clarifications. Go ahead.
I agree with Pam that I sort of saw it being able to bring more interest in the community for the heads and beds. I gave it the rating just that I did because I felt that out of all of the proposals, their the information that they provided was more detailed and, you know, schematics and it reflected more of answering the question. Did they specifically cite methodologies and did they include economical physical activity? But to your point, I see it certainly initially being more for the local people. It would take some time to get the traction going to bring in the meets and the competition, and then to what degree is there competitive locations to use pools and Olympic sizes or what have you. And again, a little bit, like you said, Doug, the arrangement between the ownership and the land and what have you, but I gave it the rating that I did because I just felt that their proposal addressed, you know, is a little bit more detailed and numbers and the designs and that kind of thing. But again, it's a lot for just the local people who are underserved to use the pool or to learn have the children learn how to swim in the other size pool. Yeah.
I mean, subjective.
Yes.
Always the numbers.
Anybody else? Okay, my thoughts on this were, I like swimming, I like the project, but, you know, to several points, you know, I look at the numbers, 3 million's a big ask, for this type. It's not this big Olympic national tour where we can host things. I mean, we can't, you could, that was in part of the presentation, but, just, you're here, the clarification on the grant, you're a nonprofit organization? Yes, okay. And then what's the actual ownership of the land? Is it owned by the nonprofit or it's being assigned to the nonprofit?
Yeah, it's leased.
It's
to the
leased.
nonprofit.
Okay.
Playground lease.
Oh, it's a ground lease, okay.
Those lease agreements are done all the time.
Yeah, no, I'm familiar. So, you know, for me, the number, it's the number, right? It's the number and it's the vision. Not saying the vision's not there, but I mean, you know, these are one of these scenarios, you go big or go home type thing, right? The particular area in which that is, I look at it from a tourism perspective. Yes, he had the, you know, support from the city in that particular area, which is good, but I mean, for the type of, you know, parking is always an issue, right? So yes, you have the space. So going back to some of those questions we have, is it really there? What else is driving? What's close to it? I mean, you know, so there's a lot to go in, but for 3 million, it's a very, very difficult number to swallow, even if it was a for-profit institution, in my opinion. Meaning I'm selling, you know, memberships and getting coaches from, you know, Olympic swimmers and all sorts of stuff. So I would have been a little bit happier. You know, and I'll go through my score. I'll use myself as you know, kind of the guinea pig here. But you know, if you turn to page 41, this was my scoring, right? So based on this being done while, you know, he's given his presentation, you know, number one, he's asking for 3 million. The total project cost is 4.2 for the swimming pool that he looked at, right? He says he's got 900,000 in matching, so that's pretty good, right? It's having almost $1 million to match something, finance it. I mean, there's some financing options. You can, you know, there's various, you know, financial mechanisms out there that you could stretch that $1 million and get something like this started over a period of time. So does it promote tourism? I put good, but I put it at the low end, right? Can it? Absolutely. Do I think it's excellent? National Aquatic, you know, all this? Not there, right? I just didn't hit it for me, right? That's why we're going through my split sheet. You know, the next page. The proposal clearly demonstrates the viability of the project, including supporting documents such as qualification, description, and project costs. Once again, good, he had it, he had the information, but not excellent, right? The amount of time it would take for us to return on the capital investment from the point of the TDC. And that's the lens that I'm looking at it from the point of the TDC. I'm not looking at it from an investment banking perspective, right? So I'm looking at it from, yeah, he had some descriptions, he had the renderings, he had, a lot of the stuff that was done. But once again, not to me a full investment package, right? Does it increase the, the economic or fiscal activity? I mean, adequately, yes, right? I mean, potential, meets as he described and tickets and training and lessons and all this stuff that could be going on. Especially with the training pool and the other one. But once again, I look at cost, is it big enough to be able to get, 5 Brevard County schools from the area getting an after school, right? So that's to me, I put it on the high end of adequate. Project readiness, does it status of required permits and approvals, readiness to see contract bids and start work, schematic design. I put that on the upper side of 8 because he did have that. He has spoken with contractors, he's been talking with people, so I put it there. And then the matching or other fund sources. I gave him a good on that because he's got 900,000, right? Like that's pretty good, right? For matching funds, but not comparatively to $3 million, right? For next. That's how I evaluated it, right? And everyone did their own. For me, I can't put anything into this, right? In my opinion. And as Kevin O'Leary would say on Shark Tank, and for those reasons, I'm out. I want to see it go, but I want to see it, in a different light, down the line. Those are my thoughts. Anybody else?
I agree. I agree. I would rather, this is not it's kind of like when you buy something and you don't have a lot of money, you buy what you need, not what you want. And I would want to have that wonderful, aquatic center. So I would prefer not to invest in something that I don't personally even think, this is kind of subjective, but based off of what we're hearing, it's just not quite, the cake is not quite baked. I think it'd be better use of our monies if we see if they can come back, taking what we have said and work upon that and present it again, because I want them to be successful. I don't want them to.
And the ask will be much bigger.
Well, that would be true, but at least I think they may be successful, as were the other. I think it raises a risk.
Just because it's a great location for something like that, like I said, but
I
on
want
a
it.
much larger scale where you had the potential, to fill capacity, and I'm not sure what capacity.
So I actually, I'm gonna ask a question to the gentleman here. Have you gone to the sports committee and done anything with them, or is this the only committee that you've talked to for Brevard with regards to funding?
No, I've talked to,
You've talked
I've
to
talked to a
everyone?
lot of politicians, and, regards a little, they're not on board, and that's okay. But,
So.
I was just gonna say, our sports committee wouldn't have, this is where the funding would be for capital projects, sports, we fund events up to 25,000, so it's a much
Yeah.
different world in that arena,
You see that I think furthers my point of the fact that trying to justify something like, I don't want to put, a round peg in a square hole, as they say, right? So if the market analysis says, hey, this might be great locally at this small little thing, just from a TDC council perspective, it just doesn't click, right? Even though, it would be great if we could have a big, aquatic center, that would be fantastic, and the location that could be, and weren't they trying, wasn't there something, they were trying to some big giant water park over by the airport, wasn't that in discussion at some point? I mean, I don't know if that ever came before this committee, but, one of those, it's one of those things, grandiose ideas. Grandiose ideas, but, it's gotta come down to brass tacks, and, so that's where we're at. Does anyone else have any comments or questions they'd like to ask? All right, so we will move on to our final talking point and discussion of the day, and that's the Titusville Place expansion, 7.5 million, and that's they scored a 65, okay. So who would like to start on this one? Bueller?
Okay. This one I had a little bit, again, because of the eligibility. And so I took it as that was not a consideration, otherwise it would not have come to us. I would have thought the staff would have prevented us from having to do that. So I took it as if it was eligible, and I think you mentioned that, I'm not sure. But as far as I am familiar because I have come to this venue for 10 years, and I do appreciate that they had, I think it was 55 million in pledges, was that correct? 15. See, I was trying to.
I'll take 55.
But I do know that they're very good when they go out and get pledges, that even if you said only half of it came in, it would still be good, because that's how much support they have in Titusville and the surrounding communities. The city would help them with the infrastructure because that is part of, it's in a redevelopment agency. So that is very well qualified to be done, and I think they want to commit to that, and that would be a great piece for them as part of their redevelopment to have an arts district. It is quite visionary, but I think they could do it. Does it put all the heads in beds? You know, I look at some of these market affordability impact studies as kind of like appraisals. It's a science, but it's also an art. So I feel like sometimes there's a little subject activity going on. However, for the small, they have been through a lot of things, the pandemic, and they were able to turn around on a dime and keep that going. He wouldn't have known, really, other than we had to wear a mask. And then I see the support of the community. Every time we go, they have a raffle. I've seen raffles, what is it, 282 or 32 seats, and they may get 1,200 and give half to the person who got the winning ticket, and then they'll turn around and say, well, you keep the other, you just keep it. So I do know that there's a lot of support. I believe in that. I think it's important when you having this growth that Titusville is having to expand out. When people come, it's another, I look at what's culturally going in places where I travel. Is there theater? Is there an outdoor event? I look at that, and I also think people who move look at what is the park situation, the schools, and the arts. Arts are very important, and I think that is changing in Titusville. But if you were a tourist, yes, you actually want to have two people, so there's two more heads in the bed. But I think it just adds to that what you need to make it more interesting, other than just looking at rockets going off. I mean, you could do a whole package, and I think it would be good because people will talk about it. I've heard people talking about the things they've seen there, and they're from out of town, and they're just raving about it. That's why he's had such a big run here, I think, and now he's expanding, and I think he's been physically responsible. But I know that this did not fit the eligibility, and that is why I scored what I scored. I certainly didn't think 30 was, it's like giving somebody an F. I think it was better than that, but we do only have a certain amount of money. So it's doesn't really matter if I'm thrilled with it. I didn't take that when I scored anything, whether it was the Lighthouse. It did not matter what I really thought about the arts. It was just, do I think they can do it? And I guess I think they can.
My comment on it is I second a lot of what you say. I think it's an important staple in the community and in the county. They have incredible lineups of things coming. What they've been able to do, where they come from, it's a beautiful story. I look at it through the TDC hat of the chair, 1.7. So, you know, they're a big ask, but we were also, if you remember in the presentation, you're here. We were the first people they came to for money in the presentation. I would feel way more comfortable being the third or fourth when they have secured more funding, right? So I don't want to be the first money in. I want to be the last money out, or the first money out, right? Not first money in. That's kind of the way I look at it. I want to see it happen. It's a budget thing. And I kind of look at it like this. There's a simple little analogy, but you really want to help your kid have a good education, but you can't afford to send them to the school. You'll want to, it's there. So you go get an extra job, you do everything just to try to help them. We just don't have the budget for it. So it's one of those things where you have to say, Timmy, as much as I'd like to have you do this, we just can't afford to do it. So our hearts are with you, but we just have to figure out, and according to the criteria, it's not saying they can't come back, but as we look at the expenditures over the next several years, and your build out time goes till when?
30.
When
Yeah, I
would-
think opening is 2030.
2030, okay, and we're in 25, so I mean, there's still ample amounts of time, right, to be able to come back to committee, right, as things are going down and the numbers start ironing out, because it would be amazing to sit and say, hey, look, of the 75 million that we're requiring for a full build, we know you're not gonna have to put all that out, but you could say, we've got a great investment bank behind us, we've got a great real estate fund behind us, the city's behind us, we've got all this stuff, and our ask is, more tangible based on what we have to operate within these parameters, right? So that's what I would like to see. Other than that, I mean, the renderings look great, So, especially if you can get the off-Broadway, stuff that you're working on, I mean, that would just be fantastic. And it's a compliment when, with the Bright Line, with everything else that's happening, it makes sense, right? I'll take a show, see Rocket, all makes sense, right? So, those are my comments.
I'll just give you my thoughts too. It's a great project. Everyone knows previously I was involved with the organization there, something we dreamt about. It's something that in the future, definitely it will happen. It needs to happen. I think to your point, the area that I was struggling with is the dollars, is the
Right.
numbers.
Right.
To be that first part, right? Again, to your point, came in 5 years later, we got 50, 60 million. We need that last whatever to get over. I think that'd be a little bit easier to go. I think 75 million is a pretty tall climb to get there in a few years. And also had a little bit of concern just about the 15 million match, that it was kind of a survey match. It wasn't
Verbal
like,
pledge.
yeah, it wasn't
Like
really
that.
cash on hand.
That got me too.
And so that's the only hesitancy. I think if some of those things come to fruition next couple of years, to your point, to come back and say, hey, 7.5, we want 15 million, whatever. I think you can come back at that point when you kind of demonstrated that all those other investments, can be made to actually make it, achievable, then it would be easier to award it.
Yeah, I mean, for something like this, I mean, even in the private sector, I can say some investment groups will come to me and say, look, we'll like this, but we need you to do this, this, and this, and then come back to us. If you can get that done, then we'll take a serious, heavy look at this. Same thing in the tech space, when, apps and users, there are some funds that if you don't have X number of users, we're not funding you, right? But something like this, where, there's multiple avenues of fundraising, to your point, I think you mentioned very articulately, the idea that you have the support of the community and donations and benefactors and donors and all these different revenue channels into it is good. 75 million for Brevard County, based on what we can allocate, it maybe 3-5 years from now, when you have more, resources under your belt, then I think it calls for, maybe it's the way to put it. It's not a right now, but it's a, not right now, right? It's down the line. So.
Are you doing your fundraising as we speak, and has that changed? Or anything new?
Not that I'm able to disclose, but the silent phase of the campaign has begun. I mean, I mean, it's,
Anybody else, Jeff?
Well, I guess, you know, one of the ways I look at it, first of all, I hope this project comes to fruition. It's exciting. I think it's exciting for downtown. I hope nobody gets mad, but I used to refer to Titusville as the armpit of the county 15 years ago. And to see the evolution there and all the exciting things that are happening, the fact that you left your position and went there says a lot to me as well. But when I look at, the TDC awarded Brightline $5 million at the drop of a hat. When you look at the economic impact or the forecast of that, it is massive. And so, one of the ways that I looked at this was, a per person acquisition of an outsider coming into the county. I realize that the initial acquisition is budgeted to be an impact over time. But when you look at initial impact of one person coming in and break it down on all three of them, this was one of the most costly. And so, I agree with all the sentiments that have been shared, but I think that with a limited budget and limited funds to spread around, if our impact is to be heads and beds, the acquisition of that tourist coming into the market, I felt like needed to be more cost effective.
Similarly, I just felt, again, based on the criteria, I didn't see performance and economic analysis. It was just kind of a projection of 11% growth, 15% growth, but nothing really tangible. I am a big fan of theater arts. I'm relatively new to Brevard County, so I look forward to participating and seeing, and the fact that they've survived over 60 years says a lot. As I am seeing Titusville grow, and looking at the renderings, it looks beautiful, but at this point, it almost looks like it's overkill for the little footprint that the town has. Insofar as heads and beds, where do they stay? Are the people really coming in exclusively to come watch a play, or is it that they're coming in to see Kennedy Space Center in a launch and, oh, by the way, we can go and do that? So it was from some of those standpoints. And again, the dollar amount of 7.5, which relative to the other ones, it was just kind of out of perspective. But I certainly would love to see it grow. I think there's viability, but again, as many of the other points have been raised, I would concur. And that's why because I just didn't, just kind of projections, and I didn't see a lot of tangible pro formas or analysis, economic, it's a conjecture. So that's why I gave it the rating I did.
Thank you. Anybody else? When is, I have a question, Peter, when is the actual Brightline supposed to be supposedly completed?
I'd say 26, 27.
26, 27, and your opening is when, 2030?
that's the
Projection.
The projection. So I mean, that in and of itself would increase the numbers by default, because now you have a station that's very close to it. So you'll pull all the people from Orlando. So that would, I think we're, as a committee, would be on the ending side of the fundraising, not necessarily on the beginning side of the fundraising, is how I would look at it. Because there's a lot that can change between now and, the period of time in which opening is planned. So just my 2 cents on the matter. But from an urban development perspective, those numbers would, as an advertising perspective, if I'm in Orlando and I don't have to drive, Anybody else? Nobody? All right. So with that being said, now comes the fun part. We will start with well, actually, should we close out the discussion and then we need to motion to close out the discussion? Yes, okay, so can I get a second motion to close out the discussion on all the projects? Okay, all those in favor say aye. Aye, okay, guys have it. We'll begin the scoring section, or not the scoring, the recommendations. We'll start with the lighthouse. And I'll open it up to the floor on what we are considering? Go ahead.
Just based on what we had said earlier, if we're just taking it, with keeping with the, with that 75% scoring, meeting that grade of eligibility, then truly the lighthouse is the only one that really kind of makes the mark. And even there, they're slightly under, but we've agreed to round up. So from that standpoint, I feel that that project has met the grade insofar as the numbers are concerned by the committee members and the voting. Again, all of the projects, as you said, Hunter, if we had, in my own pocket, I would love to dole it out to everybody, but I think, insofar as being stewards of the tourist development dollars and trying to stay true to that benchmark of the 75%, I feel that the lighthouse is the winner.
Okay, I'll just go in do you have a number associated with that? And we'll just go in a,
Well, I know she said the 500,000, but their ask was 775,000. We have 1,700,000, so. And not knowing, because I am new to the committee, does the committee generally award what the candidate had asked for, or is it a percentage or a proportion? But
Yes, any of the.
any of the
that,
above,
any of the
okay.
above.
So from that standpoint, because the funds are there and what their ask was the 775, so that they can't get the economies of scale to do both projects at the same time. I would be willing to say, let's fund their request.
Is that in the form of a motion, Elizabeth?
Sure.
do you want to hear everyone's number first and then we go through?
Okay.
I kind of like to get that.
Yes,
on the
that's a
record,
fair,
just for-
yes.
if That's okay. Jackie, we'll start with you and just go around.
Thanks. I think I could definitely be on board with 775 based on the 1.7 and the other scores. Again, I try to be true to what I'm scoring, and that's where I really struggle here because I do love all of the projects. I mean, I really stand behind all of them. I believe in them. Again, long term. So it's just hard for me because a lot of these things, even when you're looking at the secured funding or the match, to me, I work in the grant world. A match is a true match. I'm asking for $1 million. I've got 500,000 in the bank. So
Yeah.
this is very difficult. I think the way that we score this makes it harder on us to do it, and it's harder on the applicants as well. But I could definitely be on board with fulfilling the ask.
Yeah, although my score didn't meet the criteria, the group consented to, meeting the criteria. And so based on that, I would award them what they've requested.
I don't have an exact number. I'm not in favor of giving them what they asked because I don't see this project as bringing in new room nights. And that's a significant criteria for me. And I'm afraid by giving them less, it's really not going to, they're not going to complete the project, at least in a timely fashion. So may not be the answer you want, but that's my answer.
Doug,
I would concur with the full ask and completing the project.
Peter?
I'm non-voting. so
Oh, you're
I
not
will-
voting. That's right. There you go. We ask you technical questions.
Yes, sir.
I'm going for the full ask. I don't feel like they should be penalized. I think they've proven themselves. And I don't believe in giving them less, and then if they find out that because they're having to stage it out, it's gonna cost them more. That's just not helping them be successful. So I'm going with the full ask.
All right, so, I, don't agree in the full ask. I like the phased approach because they did it last time. It worked for them. I know they still have competitive bids to do. I would be willing to give them, they're requesting 775. I would give them, the delta between the 203 and the 775. I wouldn't give them the full 775, but that's just me, because they met the criteria. So,
So that's 5-2.
yeah. So,
Somebody making a motion?
yeah, so I'll make a motion. So, with the formal vote of 5-2, I'd like to make a motion for a vote. All those in favor of the full amount for the lighthouse? I get a motion to vote on that? Second, okay, so I'd like to do ayes and nays, so we have an actual vote. So all those in favor, say aye. Okay, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so 5, and then the against the nays. 1, 2, 5-2, okay, so I just want that to show on an actual vote, okay? And Tom's not here to vote, so, is he? No, he's not.
No, he's unfortunately
Okay, so,
not
so
online.
there you go, so the ayes have it, they've been awarded, so. Okay. Moving on to the Swim Melbourne Foundation. We'll do it this exact same way on the voting aspect, so I'll open it up for anyone. I guess we'll start in order again. Yes,
Excuse
go
me,
ahead.
can I make
Yes.
a question? So with the vote of awarding them the 775, would we, in essence, deduct that from the 1,000,007 to see how much we have left over? In essence, how much we would be able to potentially award the other candidates?
Yes.
So that would be, what, like 925? Okay, thank you.
Okay, so, no, that's fine. So with, so that being said, we'll, get a motion to vote on the, oh no, we're gonna listen to everyone first. So we'll start for, if there is to be an award for the Swim Melbourne Palm Shores project. That ask from the TDC was 3 million. With our 900 and now something dollar budget, they're asking 3 million. We'll start with, Jackie again,
0.
0. Jeff, 0. Pam,
0.
0. Doug, 0. Okay,
0.
0. 0. Okay, so, the vote on that one formally, those in favor of voting for this, do I get a second? Second, yes, okay, counting the vote. All those in favor say aye. Okay, all those in favor say no.
No.
No, okay, so the nays have it. 0. Okay. Moving on to the next one, the Titusville Playhouse. We'll do it the same way. Motion to vote on this, Jackie.
0.
0. 0. Pam,
0.
Doug,
0.
formality.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
0, but I hope they come back and tell us all about the silent supporters.
Basically 0, but so just to understand, so that 925,000 would roll back into,
Goes into our budget.
back into, like for next year.
Carry forward, yeah, carry forward.
Okay, and again,
Okay,
I
and-
hope they come back with
Yeah.
both, yes.
And then my,
Yes, both.
and then my vote is 0 as well. So, let the record report that. And, then we'll move to the closing. So that's done. Let me make a couple of,
Excuse me, Mr.
yes,
West, second that motion right there.
she did, she seconded it.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, let me just make a couple of closing comments on that before we do the remaining. Based on the scoring criteria, like we said, so for everyone in the room, we do want to see you back with projects as it gets, but understand we do have criteria we have to run by. We do represent the committee and the county, so don't take this as a personal thing at all. This is just, we have to look, it is taxpaying dollars that's coming into this, so we do have to be responsible as an entity as well. So as the committee continues to work and operate, we do hope we see these groups back in front of us, because this is an ongoing committee. All right, so those are just my closing comments on that. So we're going to review the remaining 2024 capital facility schedule. That'll be done by Jeff.
On the back of your packet, page 92, just flip it to the back. Okay, so the next step, we'll take your recommendation to the EDC for the August 28th meeting. If it passes the TDC, then it goes to the Board of County Commissioners on September 17th. And if the board approves it, the board can also reduce or adjust the amount as well, in any of these levels could. If it does get approved at whatever level, then the contracting process would begin, and then the project starts on October 1st. Or when the contract's signed, it probably won't be October 1st, probably a little bit after that. Take a while to pull together a contract. That's all.
Are you saying that the council could override our decisions also?
Yeah,
Yeah, it's just a recommendation coming out of committee.
yeah,
They may say,
yeah.
Next.
we're going to do it, or not.
All right, I guess we can open it up for public comment. Do we have anyone online that's tuned in? Okay,
I just want to thank you guys for your deliberation and thank you for the comments. I would like to see follow-up on the, maybe between me and staff, or the organization and staff about the eligibility question. And your particular concerns related to the Titusville Playhouse, because I didn't see that or understand that. And in the nod that we got from staff was that we were eligible, so I'm a little confused by that. And I will also just point out that I don't think as an applicant, we knew what your budget was. So that didn't necessarily come into consideration when we were setting our dollar amount. We were asked in the application process, I believe, whether or not we would accept partial funding as part of the consideration, but we, as an applicant, never knew what your dollar budget was that I'm aware of. So just a food for thought is that you know that number, so ours and potentially Swim Melbourne seems huge compared to what you have to work with, but as an applicant, we had no idea what your budget was to work with. So we were looking at the project scale and the percentage. In my case, I won't speak for him, but in our case, we were looking at the total cost of the project and the percentage investment we were looking at from tourist dollars to complete the entirety of the project. So just some food for thought.
Okay.
But
Thank you.
anybody else? We don't have anyone that tuned in online, do we? No, okay. All right, so if there's any other public comments, does anybody from the committee have any comments?
Is there an opportunity to go through the scoring and make recommendations or comments about the score sheets and how they're presented, the questions or the
wording.
criteria, the wording of it? Because I take it very literally the way I answer my questions. And I feel like, and I remind myself how it's written, and that does impact my score, but listening to people's comments around the table, they didn't necessarily take it as literally as I have.
So I would just, I mean, the committee, if you guys want to deliberate now about that, you're welcome to, it's your time, but normally we would, as we ramp up next year's committee, we would have those discussions. So we would, certainly entertain for any of the committee members to send Jeff your thoughts, your suggestions, your ideas, because as we go into committee next year, the first thing we start with at the very beginning of the year is let's review the guidelines, let's review the questionnaire, the survey, all the details that are in it, so we go through that in the very first meeting. And then that's what's been developed as the guideline package that goes to ultimately to the board for approval, along with, our budget and all of those things, which, by the way, all of that is public. Our budget was publicly discussed at the board meeting. It was deliberated at the board meeting. The board made a public, obviously, approval. So it was, all of the information about our budgets, about our grant programs, the guidelines, all of those things are all discussed in public forums and voted on publicly. So there's nothing that's hidden. So it's just a question of, person has to do their research and follow through and watch the board meetings, I always say, because it's always interesting to see those. But yeah, if you guys have any feedback, if you send those to Jeff, I mean, if you want to deliberate some more about that now, you're certainly welcome to do that.
I wasn't suggesting that. I
Yeah.
think the idea of sending it to Jeff.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that'd be helpful because then that gives them a starting point, and then as we, seat the new committee for next year, then we can go through, here's what the last committee said and suggestions that they had, and we can bring all that into the deliberations and discussions. That'd be good. Appreciate that.
And that was a very good comment, Pam. So how we were voting, where it says promote tourism, and then the description, and then the next one, has this been the same format for the last number of years?
It's been very similar, yeah.
Yeah.
There's been very few, maybe what I would call significant changes to the guidelines over the last, 4 or 5 years. So,
Okay.
but there's always room for tweaks and improvement, 100%.
Well, that's how people interpret it too. So when I see secured funding, to me, that's money in the bank.
Yeah,
It's not, we're going to fundraise for this, or we have some, pledges, verbal pledges, written pledges. It's secured funding, it's secured financing or dollars in the bank. So it's how people interpret things
Yeah.
too. So
I think that could be cleared up.
Yeah.
Because just because
And even
the
with
bank says they're
eligibility.
going to give it to you if
right.
right.
you get this, maybe we'll give you this. That doesn't mean secured to me. That's like telling somebody, you're qualified
Right.
and it's not a commitment. So there's a difference. And if we could just tighten that up, because I'm also.
And eligibility is
Yeah.
very great.
Yeah.
But
And
Yeah, we
for the
can say
eligibility, we're
comments.
talking about 75% threshold so far as that just the numbers add up. And then again, to the point, proposal clearly demonstrates the increase of economic, fiscal, and activity, including impact of anticipated, just because they have hired a professional in that field to say, okay, well, we guesstimate based on whatever, it's going to increase 11% this year, 15%. But just because that professional entity has written it that way, my interpretation was that they clearly demonstrate the increase in fiscal activity, just not a kind of a projection off, that we've sent out surveys, we've gotten, feedback from attendees, that was just my taking it literally in my interpretation. So some of those areas in the questions that come to us as a board.
Well, I think the first, when it demonstrates the, promotes tourism is our number one thing on the score sheet.
Mhm.
So if it is driving, we don't make anything if someone comes into Brevard County, goes to a couple of restaurants,
Right.
and then never stays in a hotel or an Airbnb. Is according to the way that we're allocated a budget, I don't have anything from, well, we visited Brevard, but our committee didn't make any money on that, right? So, it's just, it's the markets, it's business, right? And we have to operate within that criteria. So, it's gotta, listen, more people that I would love to have this place. If Brevard had every room booked every night, that'd be fantastic, right? For whatever reason, but that's not the case all the time. So, but that's where we get our money from. So that's really the driving force. So if more projects want to come, it's going to get more people in the beds. It's going to give us more money. It's a cascading effect, right? So
Would you weight that heavier than 30?
tourism,
Yeah, that criteria.
well, the committees, this is the Tourism Development Committee, right? So I mean, that would by definition, it's. If my job is to sell steaks, I'm not gonna be promoting lima beans, right? Like, my job is to move meat, right? So if our job is to get people to stay and visit Brevard for ancillary economic development, then it should be, look, I want you coming to stay here because we've got all these things to do here, not just, oh, I'm coming here and then I'll pop in and then pop out, right? That doesn't make us any money. So, it's like when they build, we did this big project in, dare I say, California, right? But I mean, that was the whole concept of what Rick Caruso did. He's a billionaire that built the Grove. I mean, the amount of apartments that are rented and hotels that are booked, I mean, that's why he does what he does. And if you apply that same mentality here, projects could sound great on paper, right? But in in principle, in actuality, if the desired result is increasing heads and beds or in Airbnbs, then that's the lens by which you have to look at the actual mission statement, right? And what needs to be done. Once again, I'm one person, I'm really a nobody, but that's just how the thought process would go, right? If that's our job, then that's what we have to focus on. So,
And it's also the validity of the reports, like you were saying, so there's performance in there, there's studies. You know, that's what they're projecting based on how they've been able to put numbers together.
Right.
So,
But the whole concept, just because they come to Brevard and go to a museum and have dinner and then drive back home, doesn't put the heads in beds and promote tourism insofar as getting room nights that generate more dollars for our grant money to.
yeah, and
allocate.
ultimately, look, I mean, you know, for any of the public review that can go online and watch this. You know, this is a committee. We provide a recommendation. We're not the final say. You know, that's your county chairman, right? Or your county commissioners, right? That have to oversee that. So, you know, we are doing, you know, a very important job as looking at, you know, are we properly spending taxpayer dollars, because it's a tax, right? On promoting tourism development. So, and that tourism development is funded by that tax. So if we don't get that tax, then tourism's great, but you know, it doesn't, you know, we can't be calculated like an Orlando or a Miami, right? We're a totally different county. And so, you know, you have to just approach this capital facilities committee in that lens, in my opinion. So I don't know what recommendation that was, but I think that is. So, if does anyone have anything else in conclusion or? No?
no, thanks for Jeff for keeping us so organized and putting everything together. And
You're welcome.
you do make, it's a lot of work,
Yeah.
but
Thank you.
you make it easy, so thank you.
Thanks to the committee for.
Yeah, thank
The way
you all
do the
for your
booklets,
service.
the
to
little
the
tabs,
committee on
very,
your-
very, yes.
Thank you. So I just.
Yeah,
I guess we have a-
Staff in general, there we go.
Second, so moved, all right, all those in favor? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.
Jeff is the email.
Same that time, same that.
We're all a team.